Hello world, hello TMPers, another philosophy video from Nutnfancy. Here it comes. I want to start off with a question. How do you feel when you see a civilian in possession of a gun like this? Okay. This is a semi-automatic AK-47 variant rifle. Specifically SGL-21 by Arsenal, outstanding gun. Bulgarian Circle 10, normal capacity magazine, Quark, Maelstrom, Tactical Light, Weaver, 2x7 scope. Specifics for guys who care. But getting back to the big question, how do you feel? Let's say you go to YouTube, you just happen to run into a video of a guy wearing camouflage clothing. He's got a rifle like that. He's wearing tactical gear, what I refer to as LBE, load bearing equipment, like this. Lots of magazines. Maybe he has a pistol too, kind of like this Smith & Wesson M&P 9 strapped to him. He's out there running and gunning. He's shooting humanoid targets. He's doing this, he's doing that. How do you feel? Is it threatening to you? Okay. There's lots of videos out there now by me, Nutnfancy, doing just that. Okay, dress up just like I said. It probably drives a lot to the fact that I'm a tactical gear reviewer. That's what I do here on YouTube. It's one of my main goals. Providing unbiased, independent, hopefully quality data points for my law enforcement, military, and outstanding and responsible civilian sheepdog audience. That's what I do. I take my viewers along for the ride in showing how I come up with those data points. In other words, if I say a certain thing about a gun, it's fun going to the desert or wherever I've shot, and I can say this is how I've kind of arrived to this decision. It shows competency in the review. It's interesting. It's entertaining for people who like it. But more importantly, it shows the testing situation. It shows the reality and the facts of a lot of things that happen in the testing process. But let's forget about that. Let's say I'm not a gear reviewer. That's not what I do. That's not my purpose here on YouTube. Or let's say, better yet, you tune into a dude that isn't any of those things. That he's just a guy out there in camo, AK-47, semi-automatic variant rifle, shooting humanoid targets. Humanoid being they're shaped like humans or paper. He's shooting them up. How do you feel about that? You know, guys will roll into a Nutnfancy video, getting back to me, and they'll say, well, you're crazy. You're a cuckoo, man. What are you waiting for? Armageddon? Or what are you practicing for? Armageddon, World War III, Civil War, all of the above? You're nuts. Crazy. Is that a true statement? Is it true? You know? Is that threatening to have a rifle like this? If you do have a rifle like this, if your neighbors came over, would you try to hide it from them? If so, why? You know, friends, family, loved ones, would you try to hide it from them? I think a lot of you are answering, yeah, I would. Because there is a perception of just that. That if you're in possession of a gun like that, again, not military, not law enforcement, then you're cuckoo. Where does that perception come from? Is there any truth to it? Is there any reality to it? Or is it perhaps a result of some programmed thinking in our society? Kind of driving to the heart of what I'm going to call the Minuteman prerogative. And that's what this video is. The prerogative of a citizen in the United States of America to arm themselves just like that. That it doesn't threaten society, doesn't threaten you, that it's a normal course of events. If you have an understanding and grasp of the Constitution of the U.S., about where our rights are derived from, real rights, and I'm going to try to talk to that as best I can. Let me say this too, excuse me, I gotta get a drink. I have a lot of people, a lot of friends that are not on board with the gun issue. And they're still my friends. They're well-intentioned people. They're people that for whatever reason do not agree that a person should have a rifle like this. They think you threaten society. That you are not to be trusted with this. Yes, I disagree with that. Of course I disagree with that. It's been out on video form for a long time. Go look up my Dangerous Things video, where I lay out my feelings on what I refer to as a protectionist culture that seeks to abolish anything that's dangerous to our society, and they raise our children in the same way, that you are to be fearful of dangerous things, to avoid them at all costs, and heaven forbid you become proficient and safe in their use, and we don't teach responsibility to our children, okay? All that's contained in Dangerous Things. Also, other videos that I've put out that will lay foundation work for this video, Sheepdog Concept, put forth by Lieutenant Colonel Grossman, and I used that as a springboard and elaborated on it as I saw it. Have a video out on that. Obligation of carry, the concealed carry protocol, also foundational to this. But I got to stay focused, otherwise this video is going to be way too long. Getting back to the question, is that dangerous? Oh, and I was talking about people who differ. A lot of them are well-intentioned. They're good people, they just don't see a need. That's one group of people who are going to find this video. Some of them you'll never convince, that no matter how rational, how logical your argument is, how you take them back into history to see the derivation of rights, to see their development, to understand that they are not given to, and I'm going to talk about that and state my case for that, of the government, they won't be on board with it. They are probably the products of society. Popular media, movies, shows, that pretty much indoctrinate to a large degree how society thinks. And if you think otherwise, I disagree. There's a powerful, powerful message that's always sent when it comes to guns in media, and it's one of they are to be feared, they're dangerous. Okay? Another group of people. Maybe they're middle of the roaders. They're not really for or against the gun issue, and I'm talking about this type of gun, a defensive tactical carbine. They're not really for or against it. Maybe they come from a hunting family where they grew up hunting, and to them a gun was a way to procure food or to go enjoy sports shooting. Maybe it's target clays, traps, skeet, deer hunting, bird hunting, But to them, a lot of them will say, you don't need a gun like that. Not necessary. The ones that actually anger me, to be honest, and disappoint me are the ones that do own guns for self-defense, and yet they draw the line and say, you don't need a gun like that. Yeah, you can have your revolver, you can have your single-shot shotgun. Go ahead. You don't need a gun like that, though. You're crazy if you have a gun like that. You're insane. And you go to their channel page on YouTube, and you see they're a gun guy. And yet they're lambasting other people for doing this. And you just scratch your head and go, I don't get it. No, I don't either. And then you'll have the people that when I ask a question, are you threatened by this? They'll immediately say, no, I got one. They're on board. They understand their derivation of rights. They understand how they're not threatening society with it. All stripes, all political stripes. Maybe I'll change the way you think, maybe I won't. But this is the way I feel. It's foundational to the Nutnfancy project, to what I do. Let's get into it. If we were to go back many hundreds of years and we talk about the derivation of rights, we have to talk about kings. Because kings ruled the land in Europe. Okay, my European viewers are nodding their heads up now. Yep, know something about that. And they were powerful. They were all-knowing, and it was commonly accepted back then that kings derived their powers directly from God. Direct. There were huge and elaborate coronation ceremonies that reinforced this fact that the king was appointed directly from the man upstairs. And that he would delegate this authority to his dukes, his lords, his governors throughout the land who would rule over the subjects. Okay, the common men who were given freedom as the king saw fit, who were given rights as the king saw fit. Established was a royal absolution. In other words, they were not to be questioned because it was akin to questioning God himself if you were to do that. And a lot of times it was punishable by very severe punishments. Don't do it. The king was not subject to the will of the people, that he could do whatever he wanted, and they did a lot to control the minds of men, to keep them downtrodden, if you will. Because when they kept the subjects downtrodden and dependent upon the crown, they wouldn't have to fear maybe the overthrowing of their power structure. Now, during this time, and again, let me just say also that I'm going to discuss as briefly as I can, but establishing a case, several political/philosophical principles. I'm not the end-all expert in it, okay? And there might be some historians who will say, hey, that fact is wrong. I'm doing the best I can. Bear with me. I think, for the most part, the facts will be straight, and they will definitely support the argument that I'm going to put forth. Okay, during this period arose what was referred to as common law. Okay, common law came from man, not God, but man. In other words, it was created by perhaps judges who would rule a certain way in a certain situation. Okay, and common law basically was a body of legal decisions that was put forth from man's judgment. And then when a similar situation happened, they go, well, how do we treat it last time? Oh yeah, we have a case study over here, how we did it. We'll do it the same way. And a common way of thinking came out of it, common law. And that's way maybe some rights were given due to common law. They say, well, we didn't have that right, 100 years ago. Why would we have it now? There's a lot to this. We can get really deep and very detailed. But suffice it to say that common law was held to a very high standard. So the king was all-knowing. He was great. His powers came from divinity. Don't question him. And it was said that there is no such thing back then as bad law, because if it is bad, it is not law. How's that for covering your bases? In other words, what they're saying is that, hey, if we made it a law, it was supposed to be that way, you better obey it or else. And it was this way for hundreds and hundreds of years. Now, again, I'm doing a broad stroke over the course of human history. Bear with me. Then came the Age of Enlightenment. The Magna Carta in 1215 started changing things. It started breaking away the concept that the subject, that is the common man, was nothing, and that he was to be dominated by government. And the government were to give him powers and rights as they saw fit or as they did not see fit. Magna Carta, I should say, acknowledged basic human rights, legal procedures, and then finally it kind of said, hey, kings, you're bound by law too. You can't just do whatever you want. You're accountable to the law. And then that ties into, again, common law again. That started to improve things. It started a new way of thinking. And this new way of thinking continued on into the 17th century when arose an outstanding political philosopher by the name of John Locke. John Locke really broke new ground because he very much departed from this common law way of thinking and the deity way of thinking with the king, and that the common man was nothing. He espoused a theory called natural rights, also referred to as unalienable rights, moral rights. I like to call them God-given rights. And simply, they were life, liberty, and property. And that, well, let me just read a little excerpt from him. To properly understand political power and trace its origins, and I don't want this to be boring, so I got to go fast, we must consider the state that all people are in naturally. That is a state of perfect freedom, acting and disposing of their own possessions and persons as they think fit within the bounds of the law of nature. That was a huge departure back then. Huge departure. To say that a man was equally created to his other fellow men and that he had the right to pursue, maintain property, his life, and that influenced our forefathers here in the United States of America. Specifically, Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison, very influenced by the writings of John Locke, and they took a lot of his ways of thinking and incorporated them in to the Declaration of Independence and also later the Constitution. Very hugely different way of thinking. Now, I'm not going to go into a big detailed discussion about natural rights and about, hey, there's some people who say if we really subscribe to the theory of natural rights, then we'll have no government at all. Everybody can do what they want. There's no inhibition at all. I don't agree with that, nor did Thomas Jefferson. When he wrote, anarchism, that is absence of government, is completely inconsistent to any great degree of population. In other words, when you have a society, you have people living together, you're going to have a government. What the thinking of John Locke did as he passed that on to our forefathers, I'm going to use Thomas Jefferson for instance, what he did though is change the nature of government. Okay, before, again, this way of thinking came about, king was all-knowing, all-great, and that the power came from God to the king, and then the king did whatever he wanted with it, and he would delegate it to his ministers, and then the common man had no say in it. That changed. And specifically, it changed when the United States of America was made. The Declaration of Independence, for instance, incorporated this way of thinking. What it said is, well, we don't believe in that. We think and we believe that power is given from God to man directly, to the subject. So it's delegated to him. He's given certain unalienable rights. There's that word again, natural rights, that government does not give or dispose of. And then from those rights, man delegates to government, certain powers. And those were talked about at length. They were debated at length. What are those powers? Well, in a nutshell, government exists only to secure and preserve and protect the natural rights. In other words, the unalienable rights. And they are given just powers, that is, very limited and specific powers to secure those things. Okay, because if there wasn't any government, like I discussed in my Without Rule of Law, Don't Hasten the Day video, things are bad. Everybody's watching out for themselves. You have to look over your shoulder all the time. Someone might be trying to steal from you, kill you. There's no rule of law that provides for the common defense and for the peace of society. You need government. But that government has to be limited in what it does. Again, securing and protecting the natural rights. And along with that was integrated a philosophy of, if a government does not do that, and if they become egregious in their neglect in doing that, or if they take to themselves much more power than they were granted, then the common man, that is, man himself, has a right to change things. You can call it the right of revolution if you want. And no, I'm not advocating that. I'm talking historical stuff right now. Okay, this is in our Declaration of Independence. I'll read parts of it to you. And this is a huge change. That now, that all men were equal. That men ran the government, not the king. And, the whole concept of they had no say in it and you are to salute smartly and do what you're told was done away with. And it didn't sit well. Let's get to the Declaration of Independence. I don't want this to be boring and I don't want you guys to go to sleep, but again, making a case here, and there's some concepts that I got to talk to. And thanks also to an awesome TMPer, Paul, my attorney friend down in Texas. And he was very instrumental in helping me prepare this brief. Thank you, Paul. Another awesome TMPer. I got lots of lawyers that follow me too. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them one with another, to assume the powers of the earth to separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. This is the Declaration of Independence. Bam! Right there. What? The laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. In other words, they're saying, Father in heaven. Okay, these rights were given. We're not giving them, we're acknowledging them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. Okay, so they're setting the stage of why they're going to make the case, why are we separating from England? Okay, I'm not going to get into that. Again, I'm time constrained, got to press. We hold these truths to be self-evident. And again, I'm reading this because it's so appropriate. What truths? That you have certain unalienable rights. They're not given to you by a king. They're not granted to you by a government. You were born with them. They're part of who you are. Life, liberty, and as they're going to call it here, the pursuit of happiness. Heck, there it is. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. John Locke called it property. To me, it means the same thing. That you're able to obtain, dispose of property. You're able to pursue a life that makes you happy without fear of death, retribution, unfair searches and seizures and all that stuff. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. There we have it. Okay, so guys that go overboard and go, well, we don't need a government. No, bull crap. You need a government. It's right here in the Declaration of Independence. The question is what kind of government? And the answer is a limited government. A government which secures your unalienable rights and protects them and preserves them and provides for the common defense and other things that were set forth in subsequent documents. Deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Whoa. All right, I got to reread that. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. I talked about that. Deriving their just powers. In other words, they're limited, they're defined, they're very specific on what they're intended to do and accomplish from the consent of the governed. Again, it turned the world on its head. That here we had a Declaration of Independence by our forefathers including Thomas Jefferson, said, listen, this is what we feel, is that the governed are the ones that give the government power. Okay? It's not the king, and and people are laughing. They're going, why are you reading this? Because there's a lot of people nowadays that think that where rights come from, where rights come from is the government today. Let's just say in the United States, that our government is defining what rights you have. And they say, well, I don't have a right unless the government says I have a right. That is incorrect, and that's one reason I'm making this video. The Minuteman Prerogative says that your rights are God-given. Okay, they're recognized by the Founding Fathers, the documents they drafted and spent much blood, sweat, and toil giving us this day, and we should know what they say. And that's all I'm saying. Wow, that's awesome. That whenever I got to go on. Then when any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and institute a new government. Right of revolution. It's right there in the Declaration of Independence. Some guys will say, well, now's the time for civil war. We need to go now. I mean, our rights are so trampled, we need to do it. Calm down. I don't think it is. Definitely, and I'm definitely not espousing that. I'm talking historical stuff here. Will it be used in the future? I don't know. I talked about that in my without rule of law video, Don't Hasten the Day, about a year and a half ago, whatever it was. I don't advocate that at all. But it is the right of the people to do that if they so see it being necessary. Be careful, though, and even it's drafted right here from Thomas Jefferson and Founding Fathers. Be very careful how you approach that. You don't just say, hey, you know what, the government's screwing up. Time for another government. That's bad, 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 bad. It's better to put up with some injustices and tolerate some imperfections in government, just like we are doing today, and work through the system trying to improve it than to do otherwise. You really, really need to understand that, and I'm big on that. I support it. I support the Constitution, and I work through the process. Okay? A little aside there. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. Okay, there you have it, right from the Founding Fathers and Declaration of Independence. Accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable. In other words, the government isn't perfect. You can't just say, hey, it's time to move, the trash is full. We're going to sell the house, the trash is full. No, you work through it, you improve it. There's a good system there. Use that system as long as it's functional. Then to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. Okay? Here's the caveat. But when a long train of abuses, usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Okay, first two paragraphs, Declaration of Independence, read by Nutnfancy, interpreted by Nutnfancy for what it's worth. Probably not much. So you have a right if it becomes so intolerable and that the government becomes, just what it says here, despotism. And you can't, it's suffocating, and that your rights are so horribly trampled, you have to make a change. Okay, and it's right there in the first two paragraphs of the Declaration of Independence. And this drives to my question. Is that gun bad? Okay. Let me ask you this. When they wrote that in the Declaration of Independence, by what form do you think they intended, the free man to overthrow the government? By debate? By logic? Well, look at the Revolution, the American Revolution. How did they do it? Let me take you back to that time. If you were to walk into a cabin and there was a gun back then, a musket leaning against the fireplace, would that person be thought of as crazy? A threat to society? But Nutnfancy, that was a long time ago. Things were different. Well, I will grant you it was a long time ago, but I will also submit to you that our way of thinking has become muddled, and that there has been a control exercised over the mind of a lot of Americans, and actually people all over the world, to say, you know what, this is bad. This is bad. It's threatening to society. It's threatening to the government. It is their right, their duty to throw off such a government, to provide new guards for their future security. Will it ever get to that level where that's needed? Not going to address that. I don't really know. But I do know this, is that to answer the question, and you could draw a thread all the way through these founding father documents about this, to include the Bill of Rights that were drafted later, 1789. And that's an issue. I'm going to take an aside here. I'll get back to the other point here in a second. The Bill of Rights were tagged on there to prevent a misconstruction or abuse of its powers, and I'm talking the government. And there was a debate among the founding fathers whether to even include a Bill of Rights. They said, for one, Alexander Hamilton was against it. He didn't want it. Not because he was against the rights that were enumerated, but he had some misgivings. Let me quote here. He says, he said, because with the Constitution, people surrender nothing, as they retain everything. They have no need for particular reservations. He was fearful that if we had any unmentioned rights in the Bill of Rights, that they would be misconstrued as being non-existent. Does that make sense? In other words, there was a contingent of people who said, hey, don't put a Bill of Rights in there. They have these rights. They don't have to be enumerated. And if we fail to enumerate them in the years to come, they'll say, well, that wasn't in the Bill of Rights, so they don't have the right. Bam, we're going to lay the smack down on them. But they did. One of them is the Second Amendment, of course. Of course, that's what this is about. That the people have a right to be armed, and it shall not be infringed. They also have a right, and not just a right, according to the founding fathers, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off a totalitarian government that is not responsive. And again, let me be very clear on this issue, that has a long train of abuses and usurpations. Okay? I'm quoting directly from the Declaration of Independence. Okay? And that's a very serious thing there. There's nothing wrong with a free man owning a gun like this. Okay? The Minuteman Prerogative. You're a watchman. It says so right there. I just read it. Okay? Who holds the power? Who holds the rights to government? Let's say right now in 2010, who holds those rights? You do. You hold those rights. Okay? You're the watchman over government. If government reaches that horrible level, and again, we're not talking levels down here, and that's a matter of a lot of debate. I hope my guys understand that I'm not saying this. This is not a radical video. It's not a extremist video. This is a historical video, and I'm going over and establishing the historical precedent of where your natural, unalienable, moral, God-given right to be armed comes from. And that is from Father in Heaven. Okay, it's not given to you by government. Okay, it's your right to monitor things, see what's going on. Guys will say, well, why do you have a gun like that? Well, there's a lot of reasons. One, recreational. Maybe a guy just wants to get out there and have fun with it. Shoot, fun. Maybe he wants to play soldier. Who cares? Let him play. Does it threaten you? No. You're never going to pass a law that's going to effectively outlaw them. You never will. If you don't believe me, go look in England. Go look in all the countries which have attempted gun control and have failed miserably. Their violent crime rates have skyrocketed. So let's not even go there. Okay? It just won't work. If someone is evil and they want to kill people, they will find a way to do it, unfortunately. Kind of like this. Maybe we should outlaw bulldozers too. How about cars? A lot of people run over people with cars. They kill them either accidentally or on purpose. Okay, Dangerous Things video again. Go look at it. It says everything you need to know. An AK-47 semi-automatic variant rifle. Not a threat to society. Okay, now some people roll in, well, that's great, I understand what you're saying, but there's some people that should not be trusted with those guns. Okay, I'm not going to go there in this video. That's going to add length. What I will say is that the vast majority of people who have these guns are good people. They are the sheepdogs of society. Okay, go watch my sheepdog concept video if you don't believe me. Talk about that. And they're not whack jobs. So what if they dress in camouflage? So what if they have tactical gear? Who cares? Good for them. You know, back in the revolutionary days, you know, if a guy was out there practicing with his musket, did people walk by and go, oh, look at that kook? What's changed? I will say what's changed is the control over the mind of man. In other words, you've been led to think that way. That over time, either through the media's coverage of certain events, about how the news is portrayed, about how the government has portrayed certain things, that you have been led to believe that it is dangerous to society for someone to have a gun like that. And there must be a whack job. They're a threat to society. In fact, that's completely a polar opposite of what you should be saying. They're not a threat. They're actually a safeguard to society. A safeguard. And again, you're not going to prevent bad people from getting them. You just can't, no matter what laws you pass. You're not going to prevent bad people from doing bad things with dangerous things. It'll happen. Hopefully, again, bleeding over to some other vids I've made, there'll be a good person there with a tool of equal nature that can save lives. Okay? The Minuteman prerogative. It is your prerogative, because of your God-given rights, to be armed, to be a watchdog over government. Doesn't have anything to do with hunting, doesn't have anything to do with sporting activities, target shooting. It is plain and simple. You are a watchdog as per the Declaration of Independence, which is a legal document, and also the Constitution of the United States, the Bill of Rights, to be a watchdog. You know, and if you feel like you need to go practice, you need to go train, go for it. No, I'm not advocating civil war. Heavens no. I'm advocating working through the system. I'm advocating peace. I'm advocating taking care of your fellow man, just as I've always have. But to say that this is dangerous, that it's threatening, I'm sorry, but it's an untruth. That is not true. And gun owners, if you own a revolver, you own a shotgun, and you somehow have some dissonance and go, I don't know, I'm not for those, what you might refer to as high-capacity semi-automatic weapons, I think you need to go back and look at where you derive your way of thinking. And I would hope that you would read and understand our Founding Father documents. And you should support your fellow gun owner that has that, just as we support you. Don't fractionalize. That's dangerous. Wales, Australia, England, all those gun owners fractionalized. No, they didn't have a Bill of Rights or the Second Amendment, but still, fractionalization did not serve them well. All gun owners should hang together, support one another. And I see some amazing divisions here on YouTube. It blows my mind. It blows my mind. And it needs to stop. We need to represent, the logical, intelligent, well-spoken face of the American citizen. And if he or she chooses to be armed, yes, even to this level, rock on, brother. Rock on. It's given to you right there in our documents that we just referred to. The Minuteman prerogative. It is your choice. It cannot be taken away from you, at least legally, by the government, because it's not given to you by the government. It's not given to you by a king, by a magistrate. It's given to you as a natural, unalienable right. Thanks for watching. This is Nutnfancy. See you later.